everyone, this is Izzy at Minerva. Today we are starting a brand new series looking at how to use our sleeve block to create a whole load of different types of sleeves. This is going to be a fantastic little mini series, and obviously you can add these sleeves onto any top design that you choose to use. In this video we are going to be looking specifically at how to create the puffed sleeve. This is going to have a nice big puff feature up here, and in today's video we're going to draft that at a length of 3/4, so 3/4 of the way down the sleeve. Obviously you can draft that any length that you would like using the principles that we're showing you in the video today. The sleeve is also going to have a beautiful elastic casing, nice and simple, down at the bottom of the sleeve to hold it all together. As usual with our pattern drafting series, you're going to need your standard pattern drafting tools, which are listed next to me right here. You're going to be using your own bespoke sleeve and bodice block, so your sleeve might look slightly different to mine, but the principles of how you adapt your block will be exactly the same. The very first thing I'm going to do on my sleeve block is to cut the sleeve to the length that I want it on my sleeve block. So for me, I want my sleeve to sit about 15 centimeters above my wrist at this point, and I then want to add a 2 centimeter casing effectively. So I'm going to draw a point that is 13 centimeter offset from the wrist. I'm going to use my pattern drafting ruler just to draw that line parallel to the wrist line. Reduce the volume of the sleeve by cutting into the block along that line. The next thing we're going to do is to add the volume into the top of the sleeve head. Now, if you think about it, we don't need to add any volume underneath the armpit because we just don't need to. It can sit nice and smoothly against our body at that point, but we do want to add the volume onto the top of the sleeve head up here. So on our block, what we're going to do is to leave this bit up to the notches on both the back and the front, and we are not going to make any alterations to that, but we're just going to add extra volume into the top of the sleeve head here. So use your pattern drafting ruler to draw a line that is perpendicular to the base of your sleeve and hits the notch up at the top. Then repeat that process for the front of the sleeve and the front notch. The next thing we want to do is to divide this section into 4 equal parts. So to do that, take your pattern drafting ruler and measure the distance between the 2 points. Tap that into your calculator and divide it by 4. And now draw 4 parallel lines that are that distance apart from each other. For me, my distance is 24. When I divide that by 4, I get 6. So I'm going to draw 3 lines that are 6 centimeters apart. Next, we're going to cut along each of those 5 lines completely from the bottom all the way up to the sleeve head. Great, now we've got 6 pattern pieces, and effectively what we want to do is distribute and add volume in, an equal amount of volume into each of these little segments. At this point, it's completely up to you how much extra volume you want to put into the puff of your sleeve up at the top. So if you add 3 centimeters into each segment, you're going to have quite a big impact. If you just add 0.5 centimeter, the impact will be really marginal. So make a design decision and then use the distance you want to open up the volume of the sleeve. Okay, so for us, I'm going to just add 2 centimeters into each one of these segments. Brilliant. We've got the first one set in place at this point here. So using your pattern drafting ruler, draw a line that is 2 centimeters offset from the cut line of the pattern piece. Draw a line at the bottom of the pattern where the bottom of the sleeve is, so that you know how to line up the bottom pieces of your sleeve segments. Take the next pattern piece and align this edge with your 2 centimeter offset and your straight line down at the bottom. Repeat that process for the next pattern piece. And finally, do this process for the last pattern piece. Wonderful. Okay, so now we've got a funny shape of a sleeve, but we've fundamentally got the things that we want. The only thing we need to do now is just to redraw in our sleeve head, and that's what we're going to do next. So we're happy with this shape of this curve down here, so we'll keep that, but then what we want to do is to join the highest point of each of the segments together. So effectively we're adding a bit of extra volume into the sleeve head as we draft the pattern all the way around. So grab your ruler and just find some nice soft curves to line those things up together. Once you've found your approximate shapes, just draw that new line in. Now, do you remember that we talked about adding a bit of casing at the bottom of the sleeve to accommodate some elastic? Let's draw that in now on the block so that we know exactly where the fold point is. Now, we allowed for a 2 centimetre casing, so I'm just going to dash that in place now. Excellent, that's it. Go grab your tracing paper next. Okay, quite a simple process now to add our seam allowances. Add one to the side seam, add a 1.5 centimetre seam allowance all the way around the sleeve head. You're probably going to want to dot that out first using your pattern drafting ruler, and then draw in a nice curve, a nice soft curve to join all those little dots up together. Draw in your seam allowance to your side seam, and add a seam allowance to the bottom of the sleeve as well. The grain line runs perpendicular to the base of the sleeve. Now it's a little bit harder to tell exactly where the notches should be on these pattern pieces, but effectively they should just go straight up. So it's going to be, this one should be in line. It's there, but it's also there. So we want the shorter distance. So I'm going to send it off from here. And it should run perpendicular to the sleeve head. That's your first notch for your front. And the same on the back. We'll take it from this point here. Puffed sleeve, cut 2. And don't forget to add your notch up at the top of the sleeve head as well. And then the final little thing is just going to be to annotate our fold line for our finish of the sleeve. So I'm just going to do that with a little dashed line. Excellent. So you've done your pattern piece now. That's brilliant. We're going to cut that out. Now I'm going to sew this up and add it onto a bodice so that you guys can see the effect at home of creating that puffed volume, the puffed sleeve volume. If you're at home and you want to do this as well, just to see what the effect is like, you can take any of your bodice pattern pieces and just draft out a really quick little pattern, making sure that you add the sleeve allowance onto the bodice if you're drafting it at home. Okay, great. Once you've done your pattern pieces, cut them out of calico and make sure you transfer all your line markings and your notches. Great, so we've got our puff sleeve pattern piece here, we've got our back notches, double notches here, and our front notch over here. Remember, when we drafted it, we added in the extra volume just over the top of the sleeve head between the 2 notches. So to start off with, we are going to run 2 lines of gathering stitches between the notches. The first line of gathering stitches is going to be 5mm offset from the raw edge, and the second line is going to be 10mm offset from the raw edge. Don't forget that we can reinforce the stitch line at the beginning, but when we get to the end, we're going to leave a nice loose line of thread so that we can pull the gathers together at that point. So we've now got 4 bits of thread that are loose. We've got 2 on the underside, which are the bobbin threads, and 2 on the top side, which belonged to the reel thread. So what I do is just tie the 2 reel threads together and tie the 2 bobbin threads together so they just don't get confused and messed up. Great, we've done that now. The next thing that we're going to do is to fold the pattern piece, the right sides together, and just pin along this underarm seam all the way down here. So using a 1.5 centimetre seam allowance. Press that seam open. Turn the sleeve right side out. Next, take your bodice and with the right side facing out, make sure that you're aligning the sleeve to the correct side of the bodice. So on this sleeve pattern piece, I've got a single notch facing up on the screen, and I've got the single notch of the front of the bodice here. So I know that that's how we want the garment to sit ultimately. Match up the side seam of the bodice with the underarm seam of the sleeve. And this is with right sides together. Okay, next we're just going to flip the top inside out so that the right side of the sleeve and the right side of the bodice are touching. We can now pin between the notches. I'm just going to sew that in place now between those two notches. Brilliant. So I've just sewn that bit underneath the arm between the notches, the front notch and the double back notch at that point. Now we've got a lot of gathers to fit in now for our puffed sleeve. Pull the sleeve out a little bit so you can see where your liner stitches are, and take one set of the threads that are tied together and just start to pull them so that you create a really nice amount of gather across the top of the sleeve head. Push those gathers all the way around. What we're trying to do now is to gather the sleeve head so that it fits really comfortably around the arm side of the sleeve. So I think that that is approximately where we want it to be. So I'm just going to tie a little knot down at the bottom to hold those in place, and then I'm just going to evenly distribute the gathers all the way around the sleeve head. Now you should find your single notch up here on your sleeve head, and you should be able to just match that up with the top of the shoulder seam on your bodice. And then just distribute the gathers nice and evenly between the notch and the top of the sleeve head. And then just pin that in place. Repeat that process for the front of the sleeve head too. Great, what we're going to do now is just baste that all in place first, just to help the gathers to be evenly distributed as we sew. Perfect. Once you've basted that in place, just check it all the way around, and then just sew another line of stitches so that it's all secured nicely. Lovely. You can really begin to see how those puffs of the sleeves there are going to look really nice, and it's sitting nice and flat on the underarm down here, so no extra gathers there, but lots of extra volume added up here. Now the only thing we need to finish off is the hem down at the bottom. Now often on puff sleeves you see the sort of the hem of the sleeve being gathered in one way or the other, so all we're going to do is add a simple elastic casing. Turn the garment inside out. The first thing we want to do is to turn the sleeve under by 1.5 centimetres and press it in place. So I'm just going to go round and mark a 3 centimetre offset using my washable fabric pen from the raw edge. And that means when I turn my raw edge up and it hits that 3 centimetre line, I have got a 1.5 centimetre hem turned under. So let's go away and press that in place. We then want to turn the hem under by 2 centimetres. So from the folded edge, mark a point that is 4 centimetres, offset from the folded edge all the way around the sleeve, and then fold the hem up to meet that line. Pin that in place. Now we have created a nice little casing at this point, and what we're going to do is the elastic is going to kind of come in to the edge of that casing. So what I want us to do next is just to mark a double pin at one point where we're going to start sewing and mark a double pin, use a double pin where we want to stop sewing the casing in place. That just acts as a little reference. So we're going to start sewing here, this double pin, we're going to sew all the way around, offsetting it just 2 or 3 millimeters from the folded edge here. We're going to keep sewing all the way around until we hit the other double pin here, and then we're going to leave a gap here to thread our elastic through. And don't forget, because this is a stitch that's going to be visible on the outside of the garment, we want to sew the sleeve hem with the right side facing up on our sewing machine. We're going to attach our elastic into the casing next. So take 2 safety pins, put 1 safety pin through the top of the elastic on one end of it and just seal it off. Take the second safety pin, pop it through the other end of the elastic, and then just pin it carefully into the edge of the sleeve. Keeping the elastic nice and flat, we're then going to pop the pin through the gap in the casing and send the elastic all the way through the casing, just inching it along as we go. Now the width of elastic that you're going to choose to cut will completely depend on your preference of your fit. Some people like to have their elastic quite tight and others quite loose. So you choose the length that you want based on where the sleeve is going to finish and sit on your arm. Don't forget that you need to add a little bit of crossover and 1.5 centimeters seam allowance to the ends of the elastic before you cut it. Okay, so we've pulled our elastic all the way through. The casing is now, it's all gathered up nicely. The elastic's all in the casing now, beautifully. And I've pulled through quite a lot at that point. I'm then going to remove the safety pin out of the fabric of one end, the elastic, and just take that off completely. I'm going to pull out a lot more of that elastic. Take the safety pin out of the other end of the elastic. Make sure that your elastic is sitting nice and flat at this point all the way around the casing, especially if it's thick elastic, and then overlap the elastic by your seam allowance by 1.5 centimeters. We then basically just want to sew this together on our sewing machine. You can do that using zigzag stitches or straight stitches. Once you've done that, you can then just ease the elastic back into the sleeve. And then the final thing to do is just to sew up that gap using our sewing machine. Brilliant. Once you've done one sleeve, you can then repeat the whole process on the other side of your garment. Brilliant. Let's go and take a look at what that looks like on now so we can really see the volume created. It's a very common sleeve shape that we see in lots of ready-to-wear garments, and it's a really useful little tool just to be able to have, to be able to adapt your sleeves and to give them a little bit more volume in a very nice and beautiful little way. I hope you've really enjoyed that today as you've been watching and following along with me today. If you've got any comments, feel free to leave them below the video. We always love to hear from our maker community here at Minerva. Next week, we're going to continue to look at our pattern drafting series, so stay tuned for that. Thank you for joining me. I'll see you next time.